Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very conscious that it's just 12 o'clock, so I'm just going to give it a few more moments and then we'll get started on our webinar. But a very warm welcome to those of you that have joined us, so thank you very much. We'll set the tech up for you. Hopefully you can all hear and see me well, and there's no technical issues around that, but we do have a Q&A section, so if there's any tech issues or you can't hear or you've got any issues, please just put that in the Q&A section and we will come back to you. Right, so we'll get started now because it is 12 o'clock, so huge warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I said, we do have a live Q&A section and a live Q&A feed on today's webinar, so please raise any queries or questions on that. But my name's Deb Curry. I'm HR consultant at the HR People. Delighted for you to be joining us today, and I'm going to be taking you through today's webinar. Okay, so really warm welcome to our clients that have joined today's call. Great to see you all registered. For those of you that are new to our business, an equally warm welcome. I've got a few shout outs to mention because I've got you on the call today. Apologies if I don't reference you. You're not forgotten, you're not invisible to us. What we'll do is we'll absolutely come out to you all at the end of today's webinar. So I've got MCLH with us today. I've got Cambridge Spark Limited. I've got Fair Home Group. I've got Integrated Contact Solutions, I've got FTO Law Limited, I've got Reed Autos Limited, and I've got Quill. So a huge warm welcome to what is actually our launch webinar event. So we're going to be running these regularly. What we'll do on the back of today is we'll come back out to you all. So make sure that you've got our contact details and obviously any details on future events. What you will see is you'll see a Q&A section. I've mentioned that at the start of today's webinar. So as I go through the webinar today, purely based on the fact that I can't do two things at once as well, but if you do have any questions, please just drop them in the chat for us and we'll absolutely come back out to you. I've got a fantastic team that I work with who are working tirelessly behind the scenes today. So as and when your questions pop up, we'll come back out to you and we'll answer those live as I continue the webinar. If there's a question that you see put in the chat today that you've either asked yourself or you see that somebody else has asked and you want to know the answer and we don't get the opportunity to address that in today's webinar, please don't worry, we'll absolutely come back out to everybody at the end of today's webinar with our contact details as a future events and any questions that we've not had the opportunity to answer. Okay. So hopefully you're all sitting comfortably and I shall take you through today's webinar. So I'm going to go through the agenda to start with. So for those of you that have been sent the joining instructions, obviously you would have seen this, but I'm just going to talk you through the agenda and what we'll be going through. Okay. So just bear with me. So we're going to be talking about the coronavirus job retention scheme. A lot of you that are using this process at the moment, using this scheme, this facility, you're going to be comfortable and familiar with it. Might be that you're using it in a top-up perspective, or might be using the statutory piece. But I'll just give you a bit of an update on what we currently know and understand around the job retention scheme, and obviously give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So we're going to be covering that today. We're also going to be talking through the, just bear with me one moment, make sure the tech's working. We're also going to be talking through the coronavirus vaccine and workplace testing and talking about your roadmap back to what is or what could be normal working, which looks and feels very differently to all of us at the moment. We've had lots of questions and queries around the vaccine, around workplace testing, what this looks like, what it means, and also that roadmap back to normal working. So what we're going to do is we're going to share some of the questions and queries that we've had come through and give you some kind of high level guidance as to what we're saying, what the current thinking is, and something for you to take away. with everything we talk about today, it's really important to say that it absolutely, you need independent legal advice on all of this, and we're here to support you in that. So we'll make sure that you've got our contact details. So if there's something that we go through today that you really want to understand in a bit more detail, you've got more questions around, we'll go through that, okay? We're going to be covering those other sections on the agenda as well, but what I'll do is I'll start with the job retention scheme now, so we can go through that and what that means, okay? So for those of you that are using it, you'll know that it's been extended until the 30th of September, okay? So that's important. You might be using it in its statutory form at the moment. You might have arrangements to supplement it. But the CJRS, it's going to continue in its current form until the 30th of June. So for those of you that are using it either on a flexible basis or in its current form, it's important to have that date in mind. So your employees will continue to receive 80% of their current salary for hours not worked, which we know, up to a maximum of £2,500 per month. So that's statutory position. And you'll be comfortable and familiar with the fact that as employers, we cover both the national insurance contributions and the pension contributions. So a date for you to be mindful of if you are utilising the scheme, as you probably may know, from the 1st of July, so of this year, the employer contributions are going to be changing under the scheme, and these will increase, okay? So what that means is a 10% charge towards the cost of unworked hours in July, and that rises to 20% in August and September. What we don't know at the moment is what the next bit might or could look like. But as and when we receive further information, we'll absolutely come back out to all our client base and give you some further guidance on what that means. But in the meantime, they're the kind of key headlines for the CJRS scheme that I thought was important to flag today. As I said, if you've got any questions on that, please just use the Q&A feed, and my lovely team will come back to you with answers as we're going through today's webinar. One of the questions, a couple of the questions we have been asked is, well, what about the job retention bonus? And what about the job support scheme as well? So the job retention bonus, we haven't seen any further feedback on that. I think it's unlikely that we'll get that, get any receipt or further guidance on that. It's unlikely that it'll be implemented. And the job support scheme that was previously designed but actually never launched, because if you remember, the furlough scheme was extended. I think it's highly unlikely this will be implemented now. But what we will do, we wait further guidance post-September in terms of the scheme and what's available to us, and we will keep you updated in this regard. So that's an update on that. I'll now move on to the next section. So what you should see in front of you now is our vaccination. Thank you, our vaccination piece. So coronavirus vaccine. Also, if we can just go back. Thank you very much. So coronavirus vaccine, gosh, we've had lots of queries, lots of discussions, lots of scenarios that we've been discussing with our client base on the coronavirus vaccine. And as you all know from the media attention that this has had, there's a lot of focus, and rightfully so, on this. And actually, what does that mean for us as individuals? What does that mean for us as employers? And what does that mean within the workplace? So health and safety is absolutely at the forefront of all our minds in this. The opinion on the vaccine, as you all know, from either personal experience, is it's split in itself. So in terms of the take of the vaccine, personal choice of it. So you've got some of us that are embracing it and are very comfortable with the programme, and we've certainly seen a huge pace in terms of numbers that have signed up. But we've also seen others that are reluctant to take that up, either because of fear or uncertainty, or maybe there's grounds that they are refusing the vaccine or not taking the vaccine that we would recognise under what we would call a protected characteristic. And this is really, really important, because if we're talking about protected characteristics, we're also talking about equality legislation as well, and then there's the risks around that. So when we talk about the coronavirus vaccine, we've got to think about health and safety legislation. We've also got to think about the equality legislation as well. So on the basis it's divided opinion in terms of, well, is the vaccine something that I want to, oh, sorry, we seem to have moved on the slide there. Could we move back one, please? That's okay. Apologies if that was something I pressed. So on the basis that we've got divided opinion on the vaccine itself, hopefully you can see that back on the screen now, we've also got division in terms of what that actually looks like, excuse me, and what that actually means in the workplace as well. So one of the things we're being asked is, well, no jab, no job policy. You would have seen this a lot in the media. You would have seen a lot of attention and focus around this. So what's the right thing to do? So in terms of a no jab, no job approach, can we actually do this? Should we actually be doing this? And it raises both legal and moral questions, actually. So there's been a lot of activity in this, particularly in the healthcare sector. But the debate itself, it continues to be shrouded in uncertainty, and this is really, really important. So for those of you, or for those industries or businesses that are entertaining or looking at this no jab, no job policy, the legal basis for that and the grounds to which people are using tends to be a reliance on health and safety, okay? But the legislation that comes under challenge with this is the equality legislation, which we've very, very briefly mentioned. So just to bring this into context for you, if we were to implement this now, we're automatically discriminating against young people and pregnant ladies. So for example, because particularly with the younger population, they haven't had the opportunity for that vaccine to be made available to them. So that's really, really important. So if we are taking a blanket approach to no jab, no job policy, it's really important to consider the wider context in which you're operating. So the simple answer to the question, can I do it, is yes, you can, but should you be, and what's the context of that situation? So the only, we could talk about the kind of wider context and what we're aware of. You may have heard of Pimlico Plumbers. They are leading in terms of this policy, in terms of what they feel to be appropriate practice for their business circumstances outside of the healthcare sector. But it's likely to come under challenge. It's not without significant risk if you can't objectively justify why you're entertaining in that space, okay? So a hardline approach to this will really bring into both those kind of legal challenges, but also those moral challenges as well. So as I've said, the very simple answer is absolutely yes, you can. But will you be able to defend this? And is it the right and reasonable approach for you to take? So what I would say to you is, in terms of the context of this, is absolutely seek professional guidance on it if you're in this space. So that can be tailored to the context of your business, your people, and the appropriate risk profile it can be looked at, okay? Hopefully that all makes sense so far. I can't see if any questions are coming through, so apologies for that, okay? Oh, we seem to have moved back a slide, so apologies for that. I'm hoping you can still see the coronavirus vaccine on the screen for you there, so that's wonderful. Can we go back? That's it, excellent. So that's really important. Context is absolutely critical here. So when you're making those decisions about what's the right approach to take, if you saw from the previous slide, you've got commercial challenges, you've got reputational issues, and you've also got the legislation that you have to navigate your way through. Not to mention, and I've talked about legislation a lot already, but not to mention the moral standing and what does your employer brand want to look like, and what space do you want to occupy in this respect. So if it's something that you're considering doing or not, you've also got to consider that your competitors will have a stance on this as well, and that will have impact on commercial factors. So there's lots to think about, and it's lots of uncertainty. It's shrouded in employment lawyers themselves are divided on opinion as to whether it's reasonable to enforce a vaccine or not, and therefore it's a complex area to navigate your way through. So definitely partner with a HR provider that will give you some really good support, guidance and advice on that, which clearly we can support you with. So in terms of dealing with existing employees, well, what does that look like? So the sorts of questions that we're being asked is, can an employer force an employee to take the vaccine? Can an employer dismiss an employee for refusing a vaccine? All of these sorts of things. So everything I've talked about in terms of the legislation so far very much applicable here. So yes, you can potentially dismiss, but again, only if you can demonstrate that taking the vaccine is a reasonable management instruction, and that's really, really important. And equally, you've exhausted all other avenues before you do so. But anything in this respect, I would absolutely say proceed with caution. So it's very much linked to what's your stance, what are your circumstances that relate to your business, to then guide and support the advice and kind of space you're going to take up in terms of implementing this in your workforce. So these are the things that you need to think about. So can an employer force an employee to take the vaccine? Again, can you objectively justify why you're asking that question? And just to recap, that would certainly have some space and some weight if you were a key worker or in the health sector. But again, it's the circumstances and context that's absolutely critical here. Can I dismiss an employee for refusing to take the vaccine? Well, we know there's no legal basis to enforce the vaccine. It's a voluntary piece, but again, it would be the circumstances that support your business. So is it a reasonable management instruction that we can follow an appropriate process for? And that's what will set the context and the solution for you as a business. Can an employee withhold company sick pay for refusing the vaccine? This is another question that we've been asked a lot. Again, that all depends on your stance to the vaccine itself. I think as things progress within the wider context of the vaccine, I mean, we all know that the government are looking at the passport piece in terms of international travel as well. The cultural piece around this will move as well. But as we stand at the moment, unless we're taking an enforced approach from a work perspective, it's highly unlikely that we're going to be able to take strong formal action as a result of resistance to it. So what I would say to you is that the health and safety piece, as much as there's a reliance on that from a healthcare perspective or health sector perspective in terms of demonstrating a case as to why it's reasonable to enforce some of this stuff, the majority of our advice, and again, it would be based on context, as most things will rightly be so, would be very much around supporting and proactively supporting active engagement with taking the vaccine, as opposed to making it a mandatory and enforceable thing. So I'm thinking of things like paid time off, for example, to attend vaccination appointments. Okay, so that's important. And also thinking about, well, what provision are you going to make for those that have the vaccine and have post-immunisation illness or absence? And whilst you might not want to lead openly and specifically on this communications before the event, having a discretionary element to that, or thinking through what your response to that scenario would be is really, really important. So I'd absolutely advocate proactively supporting uptake of the vaccine and providing all the opportunities for your colleagues to engage with that. And the other question that we've been asked a lot is also, can employees keep in vaccination records? That's another one that we've been asked. So again, it goes back to, is this a mandatory approach within your business? And are there circumstances in a situation that would support and justify that? But so obviously, if you're making it enforceable, then you get into the space of saying, well, actually, it's appropriate that we record this in some way. If you're not, then the simple answer is it's probably right that you can't. So as for vaccination records, as I said, if you can't demonstrate the case, it wouldn't be a reasonable management instruction. You clearly can't then insist that that information is recorded either. So that's an important one. Now, these are the sorts of questions that we've got coming in about the vaccination programme. What I would say is, obviously, it's high level for today. Please use the Q&A section to ask any questions. I haven't seen if any questions have come in, and we'll absolutely come back to you on that. But I'm now going to move on to workplace testing and some of the questions that have come up on that. So hopefully you'll see that on your screen now. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so workplace testing, critical part of managing our teams back to work and making our offices secure. But what does that look like, and what does that mean for us as a business? So we all know there's been a huge focus on this. Expansion of the workplace testing in general is really strongly encouraged. You had actually until yesterday to register. So for those of you that were considering a workplace testing approach, I would hope that you've gone onto the government link and registered your interest in that and are starting to get some information and guidance on that. We all know, you've probably heard it in the news, that 1 in 3 cases of COVID are asymptomatic. So therefore, there's a real push to support the programme of any asymptomatic testing and employers to sign up to this service. So absolutely, it's a voluntary decision for you if you want to run a testing programme, and that's the important thing. But testing can really provide confidence to your employees, to your customers, to everybody that has contact points with your business. So it's a really, really good scheme to embrace. And what you will see is if you go onto the link and register, there's kind of 3 main options. You either have a do-it-yourself piece, which is where you manage that on site, on your premises, and you manage the process around that. Option 2 is you work with a collector or a third-party provider that facilitates that for you. Or if you've got less than 50 employees, so you may fall into this category, you can also apply for community hub testing, which is basically where you partner with your local authority, and there are local hubs to you that you can direct your colleagues to. For all of those scenarios, it's important to have a planned approach to your communication and an update of any policy guidelines in terms of what it looks like and how it actually works in practice. So the key thing I would say to you here is if you're in that space of developing that programme, looking at what that means for your business, we're absolutely here to partner with you to support that. So for our existing clients, we're going to be reaching out to you already in terms of what that policy framework would look like, what that communication would look like. And for those of you that we don't work with at the moment, we're more than happy to obviously provide comprehensive guidance on that. But the key thing here is it's absolutely voluntary decision for whether you run a testing programme for your employees. But as I said, it can really provide that confidence and support existing COVID secure measures that you've got in place. Can we make it mandatory? This is one of the, and should we introduce it in a mandatory way, is one of the questions that we're discussing a lot with our client base at the moment. So making testing mandatory, it's not just a case of, I mean, obviously you've got to think about data protection law, which we'll come on to, but you need to consider employment law, you need to consider contractual terms and conditions, health and safety legislation, and equality issues as well. So everything that we've talked about, okay, in terms of the vaccination piece as well. So that's really, really important. So what we're generally saying is that we would take a voluntary approach to this. We'd support you in doing that. And unless you're in that space where you're making vaccination programs or the no jab, no job policy mandatory, we're not in a space to make testing mandatory as well. But we proactively and positively support that partnership approach, and we can really help with the communications on that as well. So can employees take disciplinary action against those that refuse? Again, if you're introducing that as a voluntary scheme that you're strongly encouraging and supporting engagement with, then it wouldn't be appropriate to take formal action against those that refuse. And equally, you really need to understand the basis, just as much as if somebody didn't want to take up the vaccination, either be it through not being made available to them or personal choice. You really need to understand the reasons as to why somebody isn't volunteering to engage with that process. And to take a blanket approach to these things, as you will probably be aware, doesn't necessarily consider the individual case circumstances and risks that can sometimes pop up. So again, if you're not in a space where you're making anything mandatory, to take formal action on the back of somebody not engaging with your testing programme wouldn't be without significant risk, and certainly one that you'd want to take some further guidance on. But this is why the proactive upfront comms and engagement with your teams and your colleagues is so important, because then everything is totally transparent, totally clear, and you're all moving in the same direction. And equally, if there are concerns or queries raised on the back of any of this, you're stepping into a space where you can openly share those, discuss and resolve them, okay? Another thing that we get asked a lot is data protection. So actually, if you are in a space where you're doing the DIY program or you're working with a third-party provider, and equally I have seen it with the community hub testing as well, where the results of those tests where there's an agreement to communicate the output of that with the employer. And that's again something we can help navigate you through if you're in that space of considering that programme. But what does the data protection bit look like? What do I need to be thinking about as an employer in terms of asking for that data, collecting that data and holding it? So that's really, really important. So the first thing I'd say is, as long as there's a good reason for you having that information, so for doing it, data protection law will provide a legal basis for protection in that regard. So the fact that we're doing it as part of a testing programme, the fact that we've gone out and proactively communicated with our teams and sought that agreement and provided that clarity before we implement the programme is going to be really, really key to it. But the important thing here is what we're doing is we are processing special category data, and that's really, really important because it has to be handled with the necessary degree of confidentiality, and you've really got to ensure that you have the measures in place to do that. And how do we do that? Well, as much as we're going out and engaging with our teams, seeking their input and taking a collaborative approach and an agreed stance in terms of what it looks like, what you also we would recommend is to do a data impact assessment, a data protection impact assessment. So that helps you document all the consideration to how you are going to process and keep that data secure and safe in line with the special category data requirements. So if you need any support or guidance on what a data protection impact assessment would look like, absolutely on hand to partner with you and support you through that process. And it's a really important piece to do if you are going to be in that space. Okay, sorry, do you mind if we just go back one slide and just make sure that I've covered everything off? I think the only other point to mention on that is the continued expansion of rapid flow testing as well. So absolutely, from an employment perspective, and it's absolutely great that we want to lead the way and consider what a solution for our business would look like. There is a general continued expansion of rapid flow testing as well. So for those of you like myself that have got kids in secondary school, for example, you're seeing a lot of testing facilities made available to you. If you've got children at school age, again, you can apply as a family for rapid testing. And equally, you can now, they're now being openly made available to everybody. So it's a good space to step into from an employment perspective and a branding perspective, that you're partnering and you're facilitating that and you're protecting the health and safety of your employees, but absolutely doing it in a collaborative way. And a consensual way, and we can support you on that journey with the policy and all the guidelines to make that really successful. Lovely. So I think that's everything on workplace testing. So we'll move on to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you very much. See, you can see how hard my team are working behind the scenes in bringing you today's event. So thank you. So the next question, the next piece we want to get into is planning your return to work, so what your roadmap looks like as well. So again, we've been speaking to our clients about, well, what should that look like, what does that look like, and equally, what can that look like? So that's really, really important. So I'm just going to look at the slide for you now. So the current roadmap provided by the government is suitably woolly and very, very helpful. Doesn't provide details of the return to work process or timescales for employees. So at the moment, we don't have any further guidance other than we should work on the basis that employees, I'm just going to read the slide for you, must only leave home for work if they cannot reasonably work from home. So that's the only guidance we've got to go on at the moment. That's absolutely under review. I think we're expecting an announcement in June time as to what the next steps of the government's roadmap looks like. But at the moment, they're the kind of guiding principles that we need to align to. So there will be some on the call today that have sites where you've had employees working on site throughout the pandemic. There'll be others that are doing remote working and are thinking about what that kind of plan back to the office looks like. And there'll be others that are in a space that you want to throw the whole thing up in the air and think about what's the right thing to do for our business going forward. And it's really important to state here that you're going to have your competitors also having this same thought process in terms of what that looks like. So a space that you absolutely need to step into. So when you're bringing people back into the workplace, so for those of you that are considering this, what works short term might look different in terms of medium and long term, and it might be that you are setting out that roadmap to what that looks like. We've seen a lot of uptake and exploration of hybrid working models, so part working at home, part working in the office. And what we're saying is when you start to switch on an office solution, if you haven't already, and you're starting to think about and explore what that looks like, you've got to build that into your thought process and thinking in terms of how can we do that fairly, safely and correctly. So it starts with communication. It starts with opening that communication with your teams to understand what are their aspirations, what are their thoughts and fears, so you can take a really collaborative approach to what that looks like. Some of you may be working with trade unions on this, colleague representation boards or groups as well, so it's important to engage with all your key stakeholders in this. Absolutely get a steer from your team, what's important to them, what are their aspirations, and see if it's something that can be realistically met. And again, even if that changes over a period of time from short, medium to long term, what does it look like? And when you start to switch that office solution back on, for those of you that are considering that and thinking, where do I start? What does that look like? Again, update your policies, make sure the communication is there, which we can absolutely help you with, and think about practically how that would work. So we're having a lot of clients at the moment, for example, that are looking at a bubble type system. So you switch on an office availability on set days, but you are part of a bubble that attends the office on set designated days. And if you're running this alongside a testing program, it really helps you to manage that requirement to self-isolate, for example, where there is a positive case. So the two go hand in hand. But absolutely, we need to start thinking about that roadmap and being very open and clear and communicating with your teams as to what that looks like. Okay. So in deciding what to do, what you're going to be thinking about is, okay, what's the type of work that you do, the premises that you have, and whether from working from home is possible. So in partnership with us, or when you contact us with this query, these are the sorts of things that we'll be working through with you, so we can make sure that your solution is appropriate, is fair, and it's right for the needs of your business, and it also is working in partnership with your teams and with your people as well, putting you in the best possible position. Okay, so I think that's probably what we'll probably move on to the next slide there, but there's a lot that we've covered there in terms of the coronavirus vaccine programme, in terms of workplace testing, and also managing your teams back to work. So absolutely, please reach out to us with any questions that you've got on that. If you're an existing client of us, we're going to be working with you on this anyway, in terms of what your policies and communications look like and what the solution is for your business. Because the most important thing here is we've got extensive guidelines, but what really we need to do is translate that into practice and make sure that you've got a fit that works the model of your business, and be prepared for the fact that that can change and evolve over time, and that's okay. Okay, so I think we'll move on to the next slide now. That's okay. Do that for you. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. So because today's launch webinar, we also wanted to do a bit of a roundup of upcoming changes and kind of pertinent pieces. One of the things that's hit this month is changes to statutory payments. So I'm not going to go through all of those individually on the screen, but we wanted to share with you an update on that. So it's really important to put that on your radar in terms of how you manage your payroll. So all of these will have come into effect now. National minimum wage starts from the 1st of April, statutory payments from the 4th of April, and SSP from the 5th of April. So make sure you're adjusting your payroll entries, updating your records to reflect those changes, because they've come into effect from April of this year. So that's all I'm going to share with you on that one. Make sure that that's available to you after today's session. The other piece I wanted to talk to you about, if we can move on to the next slide. Just checking that my tech can work, so bear with me. So hopefully you can all see this. Is tribunals as well. So we've talked a lot of different subjects today, but one of the things that I just wanted to bring everybody up to date on is an increase in tribunal claims as well. Okay, so some of you may not be aware of this, but we are seeing, and we have seen significant uplift in tribunal claims. And I think in terms of the current climate with COVID and the number of changes that our businesses have gone through, it's one that we'll keep a watchful eye on. So just some kind of key facts for you there, really, which is important to highlight. So we've seen the highest level of single employment tribunal claims since 2013, 2014, when the legislation changed, between July and September 2020. Okay, single ET receipts are up by 25%, and multiple ET receipts are up by 82%. So that's a huge uplift. So we're seeing that cultural change and shift in terms of the ET claims that we're seeing. Unfair dismissal was the most common complaint in October to December 2019. I think the landscape here is continuing to be challenging. So again, we would partner with you to support and navigate through any ET claim process. And I think it's just really important to understand the wider landscape and the changes that we're seeing through this as well. And if we come on to increase in tribunal award payments, as with the statutory increase of the statutory fees, I just wanted to bring your attention to this as well. So again, I won't go through everything on the slide, but it's important to say that there are some changes to the awards that are being made as well. So just one to put on your radar and make you aware of, so you can see that the tribunal award payments themselves have also recently increased. And those new limits will apply where the effective date of termination or the relevant event falls on or after the 6th of April. We are seeing a significant delay in the ET process and what's happening, given, as you can imagine, the number of contacts with ACAS, given the number of changes within UK PLC, but just one I wanted to put on your radar today to make you aware of. But we'll move on to the next topic. Thanks very much. Which I can't do an update in April without talking about IR35. Gosh, that's probably something most of you are aware of. It came into force from the 6th of April, and we've been talking about it for a while, because for those of you that know the history, it was due to come in last year under the Good Work Plan, but because of COVID, it was delayed until this year, but it is now in place. So basically, just to give you a bit of context, and apologies if I'm stating what you're already comfortable and familiar with, but the rules were introduced to ensure people that are working like an employee, but through their own limited company, are paying broadly the same tax as someone that's employed directly. So it's all about tax. What we are getting guidance on is that employers will not be fined for accidental IR35 errors in the first year, but it's really important that you have an awareness of this. I'm just going to spend a very short time just pulling out the key points for you, but I'll absolutely reiterate that for our current clients, we're going to be talking to you about this, and if it applies, we're going to be providing all the support and guidance that's tailored to your business. So if you do have any questions or concerns about IR35 directly, we can come back out to you and support with that. So just to take you through the slides and just the key points on IR35. So medium and large companies in the private sector that contract personal services company for the provision of worker services will have to assess tax status. So where I've talked about employees that are working through their own limited company for you, you will now be responsible for assessing tax status. And why is this important? And we'll come on to this. You as the end user will be responsible for deciding the employment status of individuals. So there's employment law implications for that are still being worked through, but I'm specifically talking about tax today, okay, in the I-35. So you've got to determine the employment status of a worker. For those of you that follow case law, there's been a huge case ruling on Uber drivers at the moment that you may be aware of. But you must do this for every contractor. And what we are seeing with the initial implementation is a lot of companies are taking quite a blanket approach to this, and that can be dangerous, and it can be challenged. So I would absolutely say that you need to have a process in place where you're making that assessment for every contractor that works for you. So you've got to pass that what we call determination on, and reasons to the worker and the company that you contract with, on the date or before the date on which the contract is entered into, or if the work starts later, give your determination before that date. So the important thing is you hold the liability, and you need to be driving this. Okay, so I'll just come on to the next slide. I can get that working. So IR35 is hugely complex. And as I've said, you don't take a blanket approach to this, because that can be dangerous. Because what you need to do is you need to keep detailed records, and just referring to the slides here, detailed records of your employment status determinations. That's what we call that process, including the reasons for the determinations and any fees paid. You've got to have a process in place to deal with the disputes that arise from that. So what does that look like? How practically does that work? And if the worker disagrees with your status determination, you've got to consider the reason given and decide whether you maintain that or withdraw it. And you've got to communicate that clearly. And you've got to provide a response within 45 days of receiving that disagreement. And obviously there's the liability there in terms of tax. So what you really need to be thinking about, if you haven't already done so, is you've got to really think about, decide who's responsible in your business for ensuring compliance. So who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to be monitoring this? Clearly, you're going to want to identify those that fall into this category of what we would call public service companies or any other intermediaries. You're going to want to audit these arrangements and have a process in place for doing that, so you can see who falls within and outside of IR35. You're then going to want to communicate that determination, as we've just gone through on the slide, and that's known as the status determination, and that's really important. And then you're going to want to consider and document any system changes that might be required as a result of this. So, for example, do you want to relook at your approval process for obtaining contractors? Do you need to look at your onboarding process or how you recruit people? And does your payroll capacity enable and allow for all these changes? So more questions than answers, unfortunately, on today on IR35, but I just wanted to put that on your radar. And absolutely, for our client base that we currently work with, we're going to be guiding you through and navigating you through what that means for your business. But if you've got any questions and obviously want to raise those, then we'll take those from you today and come back to you if we don't get the opportunity to answer them today. Okay. So that's IR35. So thanks very much. And I can see that some of you are raising questions on the screen, which is great. I can see my team are responding, so thanks ever so much for that. So in terms of, we've gone through a lot of legislation there. We've talked about obviously coronavirus vaccination, testing, roadmaps, returning people to work. What does all that look like? Statutory payments, IR35. What I also just wanted to put on your radar is kind of what's coming next. So legislation to watch out for, and what we can expect to be seeing in the landscape, in the legislation landscape going forward. So for any of you where gender pay gap reporting applies, and that's only if you've got 250 or more colleagues, you'll know that for those of you that are in this space, you know that there's been a reprieve and that's been suspended until the 5th of October. But absolutely there's an appetite to look at potential ethnicity pay gap reporting. So that's one to put on your radar, and one that we will be keeping a watching brief on as to what developments or changes look like in that regard. The other employment legislation alongside the Good Work Plan as well, there's lots with the Good Work Plan that hasn't yet been implemented. But we're also looking at protection for pregnant employees and new parents, which may be extended. So as you may or may not currently know, women on maternity leave, you get greater protection than colleagues in a redundancy situation, for example. So you, in a sense, get first refusal on alternative roles. There's plans to consider extending that period of time that applies to, from the date that I make you aware, or an employee makes you aware that they're pregnant, through to 6 months after maternity leave has finished and they've returned to work. And there's also thinking around in terms of those that take shared parental leave and adoption leave. So lots of focus on family friendly changes and policy changes. And again, we'll partner with our existing client base to update any policies as appropriate in line with this. And if you've got policies or procedures that currently cover this stuff, and you want to ensure that they're compliant with Good Work Plan and also these upcoming legislative changes, we can absolutely help you with that. Okay. So that's the end of that bit. What I'm going to finish the session with is I've just got 2 very short polls to do. So thank you ever so much for your time and attention today. I hope that we've covered a lot there, so I hope you've got some good stuff to take away. I can see that there's been a number of questions that have been raised that we've been answered to, but just a quick poll, because we've got some case studies that have come in that are good case studies to talk about, some of which are in the context of what we've covered today. So I'm going to ask the first question, and what you'll see is that there's a voting facility that's come up on the screen. So my first question, so it's yes, no or maybe, does anti-harassment training give employees a defence for harassment claims? So I'm just going to see if anyone's going to, excellent, I can see, thank you very much. I can see that we're collecting responses. So oh, the figures are changing as I'm talking. So yeah, so 25% if you think yes, it can give an employer defence. I've got 38% saying no, it can't, and I've got 38% saying maybe. So thank you for your responses there. Let me take you through the answer to that, and I'll show you the case that I'm referring to. So the answer is definitely maybe. Okay, so just going to check that you can see that on my screen. Oh, excuse me a moment. Just going to move that on for you. So the answer is yeah, it's definitely maybe. Sorry, I don't seem to appear to be able to move that screen on. So there was a recent case law. It was LA versus Gellen, where they use this defence. They use this reason as a defence to say that we do anti-harassment training, and whilst the case in itself was proven to be comparable, and I've got the notes on the screen there. Thank you ever so much. A challenge, actually what the tribunal ruled is that the anti-harassment training that delivered was stale. It was 2 years, it was delivered 2 years previously, so they couldn't rely on it as a defence for the concern that was ultimately then brought to tribunal. So the respondent actually lost the case. So what tribunals will look for, and then this again is the reason I've just put it on today's section, is how effective the training was in practice, when the training took place, and if there was any further reasonable steps that you as an employer should take. So I think a really good takeaway is training is not just a tick box exercise, and make sure you keep it up to date. And again, for our current clients, we're going to be partnering with you in delivering up-to-date training that's aligned to any legislative changes. But this is a good example of where the intent there was to train employees and to keep people up to date, but the execution wasn't very strong. So if you've got any concerns or questions around equality training, and particularly we've talked a lot about equality today in terms of impact, and you're stepping into that space where you really need to consider all of this, then having your respecting the workplace training up to date and managing diversity or dignity at work is really, really important in the current climate. So absolutely reach out to us if we can help you with that. So I've got my next question now. Hopefully again the tech will work. Thank you ever so much for our team that are working hard behind the scenes on this. I can see but hopefully you'll have the question come up. So can an employer fairly dismiss an employee where they refuse to wear a face mask at work? You may have heard of this case. It's very recent. So, or we've got strong response on this. We've given it some thoughts. I think I've got all the votes come in so far. So thank you for that. Excellent. We've got actually quite a spread. So oh, we're moving again. So we've got 38% saying yes, you can. We've got 13% saying no, you can't, and we've got 50% saying maybe. So thank you. And again, the answer to this in terms of the context is maybe. So absolutely. So there's a recent case that's come to light on this one. If we can just move the slide on, hopefully you can see that. Let me just move that on again. Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so we've got, again, you can see the details of the case up there. So the employer and the driver handbook required the employee to take all reasonable steps to protect the health and safety and that of others affected by his actions, and it follows its client's instructions regarding PPE requirements. Okay, so the majority, and Mr. Kublis, majority of his work involved travel to a client's site. I'm just going to read this on the screen for you. So where you're required to wear a face mask at all times. He refused on 2 occasions, arguing that the cab of his lorry was his own area and it was not a legal requirement for him to wear the mask. But subsequently, he was actually banned from the client's site because the client's requirement was for a face mask to be worn. So the ET actually found that the decision to dismiss him for refusal to wear this and the subsequent ban from the site fell within what they said was a range of reasonable responses of the employer and was actually fair. So we are chartering, we're navigating uncharted waters here. So this is the first case law that's come up in respect to wearing face masks and PPE. We're going to see lots more, but it's really making sure that you take a sensible and appropriate response in these new scenarios that none of us have dealt with. And absolutely, we're here to take any of your questions and queries on that. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight. So that's our presentation for today. Absolutely, we've had lots of questions that have been raised throughout the seminar, the webinar today, that I can see on the screen, and I can see that my team have been answering them. Is there anything that you want to ask now before we close the webinar that we haven't come to? Let's have a look, see if we've got any questions that haven't been responded to. I'll just give you a moment in case you've got anything you want to raise. And I'll just reiterate, if there's been any questions that have come up today that we haven't had the opportunity to answer, we'll absolutely review those at the end of the session and come back out to you all. Looks like we've been asking those as we've been going along. So I can see that, oh, hang on, we've got someone answering it. Yeah, so do you think workplace tests? Yeah, we've covered those. So we'll come back out to you all, but I'm going to bring it to a close from today. So thank you very much for your time. I hope we've given you a bit of an overview there of everything. We'll send you all an email on the back of today. Make sure that you've got our contact details, and we'll keep you aware of any future events. But big taster there, and thank you very, very much for your time today.